Welcome.
Hey Ron, how do you need to live? You know your time.
Now it's all about Daddy.
It's always all about
Tell me you're happy to be sitting down anywhere. Been there, done that. Okay, I want to kick this thing right off. I'm very proud to be here and be part of this. You're in for a real treat, a once-in-a-lifetime event. And on behalf of Harman Professional, all the presidents of all the Harman groups, right there, and Harman Pro and Harman International, you might see we're a small little company on the show floor somewhere. Anyway, we're here to recognize and honor a landmark, legacy this long. This studio, it really has been our past. It's current, and ladies and gentlemen, it's our future. Let's get this panel underway. I want to introduce to you right now Mr. Dan Daley, who moderate this. Dan Daley.
Thank you, Buzz. Thank you. Thanks. Buzz is the executive, so he gets the wireless. You know, I was trying to figure out exactly how to start this because, you know, it would have been so easy to just praise Jimi Hendrix, to praise Electric Lady, and as a journalist, I kind of have this aversion to stating the obvious because we know how great they were. But I want to just give you a quick little anecdote that came up on the floor a little while ago. I bumped into Dave Scaff. He's the monitor mixer for U2. And he told me about something that happened about 5 years ago on the Evolution tour. The Edge has a lot of processing for his guitar, and just before showtime, all the settings went blank. They completely lost the settings. And there was a lot of panic and a lot of frenzy going on, and somehow or another, the guitar got plugged directly into the amplifier. He hit a chord, Bono turned around and said, "That's the sound we're looking for." And that's what you're going to basically get here. You're going to be listening to some people who made records that are still current, and they did it at a time when you basically took the cable and you plugged it into your head or your heart. So, from an extremely difficult green room, I want to start bringing everybody up here. First up, Mr. John Storyk, who's one of the best-known studio designers of all time. He is the guy who designed Electric Lady, and he's done studios for Whitney Houston, Bob Marley, Aerosmith, Alicia Keys, and many, many, many more. John Storyk, ladies and gentlemen. Next up, Eddie Kramer. We'd spend much of the time here if we just enumerated the people that Eddie worked with, but an engineer and producer for artists including the Rolling Stones, Traffic, Peter Frampton, Led Zeppelin, Johnny Winter, Bad Company. There you go. Next up, another legend, ladies and gentlemen, Al Kooper, discovered and produced The Tubes, discovered and produced Lynyrd Skynyrd, founder of the Blues Project, played with the Rolling Stones, The Who, George Harrison, and God knows who else. Al Kooper, ladies and gentlemen. Next up is Bob Margouleff. Bob has done an enormous number of records, but the one that really shines here today is the landmark recording that he did at Electric Lady for Stevie Wonder's Inner Visions. Grammy winner, Bob Margola. And next up, Michael Frondelli, a very, very special place on this panel because this is a guy who started his career at Electric Lady back when we still had assistant engineers, went on to work with Joe Jackson, Eric Johnson, Quincy Jones, the Eagles, and a pioneer in surround music. This is your panel, ladies and gentlemen. We got a lot of stuff to cover here, and we got a little bit of a ring. We're going to get rid of that in a moment. There you go. Okay. John, I want to kick this off with some of the stuff that you've assembled here in terms of pictures, because tell us what you got. Tell us what we're going to be looking at here.
Okay. My job, history, building. So, well, actually, Michael got his start at Electric Lady, but so did I. And it's hard to believe it's been 35 years because Electric Lady and my career started at literally exactly the same time. So I guess my job for 10 minutes is a little bit of the early history and how it started. And then we've got some other pictures that'll just sort of stay in the background. I did a little bit of research. Electric Electric Lady's on 8th Street in New York. It's been continuously running for 35 years.
Yes. Yeah, really.
Really proud of. And up until about 20 minutes ago, I was going to say the longest continuously running studio in New York until Al, of course, corrected me and said there's actually one other studio that has been running for more than 35 years, but then Al reminded me he's 62 and couldn't remember the name of it. Okay, but anyway, it's one of the longest running studios in New York. So here's 8th Street before the building was built. The building's built in the early 20s, but before the early 20s, this is Electric Lady Studios. It's just an alley, okay, until a young architect by the name of Frederick Keisler, and this is a picture of him, was commissioned to build the building that the studio is now in. It was actually built as a cinema, and was a cinema for many, many years, even when Electric Lady was running, the 8th Street Cinema. This is a picture of him. Of course, what's pretty serendipitous for me is that while I'm an architect studying architecture at Princeton, my two favorite architects were Antonio Gaudí and Frederick Keisler, who only designed 3 buildings. Little did I know that I would cross paths with him again. I did not have any idea but I knew that he did a theater, but I didn't know where it was. There were very few pictures of it. This is the theater that he designed in the 20s, and this is more or less Electric Lady now. Of course, there have been some changes. It was a theater on the main floor, and in the basement was more or less a basement, which for most of its life up until the 60s was a dance club. Okay, the theater was very famous, and this is a picture of it. It's pretty amazing that this was built in the 20s. It's the first movie theater in the United States not to have a stage. It's an incredible piece of architecture, and I was aware of this, but had no idea where this was on 8th Street. Anyway, Frederick Keisler went on to design really only one other building, which was a museum in Jerusalem 45 years later, and then he passed away, and I was a big fan of his. So, how does this become a studio? Jimmy buys this building, and Eddie will tell us a little bit more about that. I always thought he bought the building because he ran up too big a tab at the club, okay, which was the Generation, but I suppose there was some other reasons. But ostensibly, Jimmy and his manager, Michael Jeffries, bought the club. They didn't buy the building, they rented the club, which was in the basement of the building, which was the Generation, where I used to go as a sophomore and junior and senior in college to listen to musicians, including one night an odd, strange sounding left-handed guitar player. Okay, again, little did I know I would cross paths with all these people. But he bought the Generation to convert it into a club. And Jimmy, in the late 60s, in 1968, there were a few places where people went, and one of them was this very strange nightclub downtown, okay? Here's me influenced by, on the left, Gaudí, and this is a Frederick Keisler building. But I had done only one other project. I was 22 years old, and it was a very strange club called Cerebrum, which made the cover of Life magazine, actually. And Jimmy went to this club, and somehow he decided to hire the kid that designed that club to design his club. I had designed no other building other than this one house on the right, and this is now 40 some odd years ago. And so he hired me to do this club, and I found these drawings a few weeks ago. This is the original drawing of the nightclub in the basement for Jimmy. And Jimmy was very into circles and curves, and you can now, this is not an architecture class, see some of the influence from Gaudí and Keisler, and we designed this club for Jimmy with a little bit of a stage, and there was an idea to have a small recording room in the back where he could record, et cetera, et cetera. At the last minute, at the 11th hour, my soon-to-become lifetime friend Eddie Kramer somehow convinced Jimmy to not build the club, this was not good news for me, and turn it into a recording studio. I watched, here I am, a 22-year-old person in the 60s being asked by Jimi Hendrix to do a club. That seemed like a very nice idea. And now I watch the club disappear. I've never been in a recording studio, but they allowed me to take a few months off, which I did, learn as much as I could about studios. We hired an industrial acoustician, Bob Hansen, to help us with the isolation acoustics. And the club project soon became a studio project. And this is the original layout of it 35 years ago. Some things have changed, many things haven't. We found some of the old drawings, okay, and this is the most interesting one. This is actually the original construction drawing, and you can see the big Studio A, which is still there, this very strange control room, which has been modified a number of times. All of it is in the basement. There's no Electric Lady Studios on the ground floor. You come in and just go down.
Hey, John, this might be a good opportunity to ask you about one other thing that's down in the basement too, which is the Minetta stream, I think it is, the creek.
I
You
will
can-
talk about that.
All right.
Okay.
It's the only thing that's not running there, right?
Right. Well, when we were in construction, we'll come back to that in 1 second because I'm going to show you some construction photos. So here's some of the original drawings, and you can see the sloping ceiling, and that's the theater above us. That's the movie theater. And and then the final drawing I want to show you is the entrance, and there's a little sadness about the entrance. Okay, and the entrance was this sort of curved. Influenced by Keisler and influenced by records and influenced by the one and only project I did, we created this entrance to Electric Lady Studios, which sadly enough is not there. Should be, because I really think it was an amazing landmark, but got torn down only a few years ago. And this was all anybody saw from the street. And the only hint between the street and the world is this one little window with the camera. And if that camera could tell some stories about who came up to it, which would be pretty amazing. And you walked in and went downstairs. And here's some building pictures of it during just about when it's complete. And we found some of these. And there's a blow up of the camera. So here's some construction photos of it being built. It was actually a very good site for a studio. It's on the ground. We were able to use concrete block construction, sand filled, which still to this day is one of the best ways to build a studio. And the story that Dan is referring to is right over here when we were digging some of the foundations, deep foundations for the concrete wall. One day, we just went a little too deep, and the next thing, it's Yellowstone. It's just completely flooded, and basically what we tapped into was an old river called the Minetta River. And to this day, the Minetta River still flows under the studio, and there's double and triple pump systems, and there have been some nightmarish moments of flooding. I'm sure Eddie knows of them. And
Can I throw the quick story in?
yes, you can.
We had completed the studio, and as John was saying, that we had actually accidentally bumped into that channel of water, a tributary of the Minetta River. And studio's finished, it's 1970 now, and it's March Madness, and it's pouring with rain. Now what happens is, in the ladies' room, there's a big sump pump, and then there's another one way back in Studio B, Studio B. When the water level comes up, the pump's supposed to kick in, it does. It's supposed to push the water underneath the studio through these pipes out the back. It didn't. And I walked in the studio one day and said, geez, you know, the floor looks kind of wacky. Why is it all sort of wavy like this? Apparently the water had so much pressure pushed up, and the entire floor had to be replaced. They had to rip up the concrete, and they had to clean those pipes out again. It has been, well, I think Jimi Hendrix said it very clearly. He said, man, I've always loved that underwater sound, and he got it.
Here's some more construction shots. Construction took over a year. So basically, we were in new territory here. The era of an artist building his own major, sort of somewhat world-class studio is really just beginning. A lot of people not really knowing what we're doing. It took about a year. And here you see some of the shots.
There's the trench where we first
Right.
dug down.
Right over there. Okay, and some of the footings that are poured. Some of these shots were taken control room footings being done. So here we are. This is the control room before it's finished out. Air conditioning, ductwork. There's a good shot in the studio looking back into this somewhat oddly shaped control room, at least by today's standards. And some more shots. And anyway, 1 year later, the studio is finished. It's quite an experience, and
Cost over $1 million too, by the way, $1970.
that's a lot of money.
And he went over
1970.
budget too on that, didn't he wind up with
Yeah,
a
the
loan
story-
from Warner Brothers, I think? on
Yeah,
that?
well, the story was that we kept running out of money. Jimmy had to keep going out on the road and to make more money to sort of pay for the construction, which we had to keep stopping and starting. And then I think eventually he and Michael Jeffries went to Warner's and got an advance against his publishing or his record royalties, I'm not sure which. And that's how we were able to complete the studio. It was actually completed His first session was in May of 1970. But carry on, John, sorry.
So we have, these are a few of the shots of the studio in those early years, and we'll just go through some of these.
Which studio we're looking at right now?
This is Studio A, which more or less is still there. Actually, we're going to end with a few shots of how the studio looks now. Some of the rooms are totally different, but Studio A is more or less the same. And there's a nice little story here, because even then, I had an idea for this kind of a variable acoustic, a track with a curtain that would come out so you could change the acoustics. And it wasn't until recently, it wasn't until 34 years later that finally the new owners have finally put the track in place. I put the curtain up, right? The track was there all these years, so I was kind of happy about that.
I have to say one thing though, this next picture that John's about to show you is, to me, one of the key elements of Electric Lady Studios. The next picture coming up. See, what John had designed was a theater lighting system, and this was a studio for the artist. It was about the artist and for the artist. We want to make an environment that the artist would feel comfortable in. And so you could wash all of those walls. Those walls are white carpets. And so you could actually, Jimmy said, hey man, I want like a purple kind of vibe tonight. And you make a purple kind of vibe on one wall. You want a green on another wall. You could do that. And it made him, and any other artist who walked in there, very happy and comfortable.
And we had,
As you're moving here, John, feel free to chime in, anybody. Just tell us where Jimmy's reflected in the studio itself. I mean, that was a great anecdote right there. What other kind, because like you say, this was kind of virgin territory.
well, I'm
Artists
asked
were
a lot
doing
of
this.
time, a lot of people have asked me over the years, what was Jimmy like? How much time? I didn't spend very much time with Jimmy. I maybe spent 4 or 5 meetings with Jimmy. But he did have some very specific requests. He was very, very insistent about wanting as many walls and surfaces to be curved. No surprise. I never asked him why. It was pretty obvious, at least to me it was obvious why. You can see in the first design of the club where a lot of that came from. And when the club became a studio, there were some surfaces that had to come out. There were certain curves that just had to disappear, but some curves stayed. Like, for instance, this shape right here, which is still there today, this curve and this ceiling, which is actually a corkscrew. The ceiling is a flat corkscrew. There's no single surface that's in a plane. It was all inspired by somewhat Jimmy's requests and also me at the time wanting to explore these curves because of my 2 favorite architects. There is a nice story. All the doors were in place. There's quite a few doors in Electric Lady, and these are expensive doors. Okay, and he walks in. And he fell in love with it, and he was happy. He said, "You think you could change those windows to round windows?" I just looked at Ed. I said, "Is he serious?" He said, "Yeah, he's serious." Boom. All of them went out, and they're all round. I think they're still there. They're still there. They're still round. He just said, "I want them round." And, of course, now we got a little bit of the reason for the over-budget part. Okay? So here's some of the...
Wait, go back
Yeah.
one, John. Just go back the one shot. Oh, yeah, sorry, the one shot of the console. This is the Electric Lady's console. Up in the air, we had to reconstruct it because the guy we bought it from turned out to be, how should we put it, not very savory. And he managed to scam us. He would have the Studio A console all loaded up with all the modules, and then Studio B console was kind of covered up with a big black cloth. Little did we know that he was pulling the modules out of one console, putting them in the other, and say, "Hey, this one's finished. Guess what?" And then the next week we'd come back and look at Studio B console, and he'd take the module out of A and put it into B. And so in the end, the sheriff shut him down for non-payment of taxes, and we went up there one day with a truck, and we took everything out of there, and we had to rebuild the board ourselves. Shimon Ron, who was the chief engineer.
You'll see a
at the
picture of
time.
him. We have a picture.
He's
In fact,
coming
there
up.
he is, right here.
There he is.
Yeah.
Shimon.
And this is in an era when you didn't buy a console from a store and plug it in. You basically made it. Consoles were custom made for you and more or less assembled mostly in the studio. This is the Little B studio, which was more of an accident, although a lot of cool records came out of
Kiss's
it.
demo was done there.
Yeah. Bobby's going to tell us some stories about that.
That
And
was
then we end with just a few, the hall. There wasn't very much public area. There was a little bit of a lounge downstairs and this long hallway, if you remember from the floor plan, to get down to the back. And of course, covered with these famous murals. This is a mural from the bathroom, actually. And this is the only little lobby lounge with this mural. And I think some of the mural has
It's
now...
all there.
It's all there, but some of it's come off and gone into the studio now, and we'll see that in the picture. And
That's the whole way.
that's the hallway down, and I had not been an Electric Lady in 25 years till last fall. It was quite, actually somewhat moving. And these closets are still there for storage.
In fact, those first 4 closets where Jimmy, we used to keep all of Jimmy's tapes in those first 4 closets for years, until they,
Murals are
went-
still there.
yeah, the murals are still there.
Anyway, those are the early pictures. I'm gonna stop right now. Dan's gonna move this to some people with some stories, and then during that, we have some pictures of just some of the early artists.
Yeah, well,